Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Visual Studio Office Hours. Today, we're going to talk about something very interesting, and this has to do with large solutions. So, I know there's a lot of you out there that has like big solutions with a lot of projects, and I'm sure that you think that they're really, really large. But I have a feeling that the people we're going to talk to today is going to tell you some stories about some truly amazingly huge solutions, and talk about some of the problems that come with these huge solutions, and how Visual Studio and the new features that keep coming out with Visual Studio, all the updates, they will help improve the situation of dealing with those large solutions. But just to be fair, I think a lot of smaller large solutions is still would benefit a lot from all this stuff. And so to talk about all this and teach us how to better deal with these big solutions, let's welcome Kira and Andrew. Hello, you two.
Hello.
I was hoping that Kira, maybe you could start, just give a brief introduction of yourself.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having us. My name's Kira Weiss. I'm a PM on Visual Studio, and I specifically look at opening your code, large solutions like Mads mentioned, and performance as well. It's all tied together.
All right. And Andrew?
Hi, I'm Andrew Cheung, also a PM on Visual Studio, and I've actually been focusing on code search and code navigation. And so I've been working with Kira a lot around how we look at some of these problems in working in large solutions.
All right, so let's talk about the problems that we're facing with large solutions, and also maybe define what is a large solution. How big does a solution have to be before we consider it large? Andrew?
Actually, Kira, I'm going to turn that over to you, because I think you've been looking at that a lot more.
Yeah, I think it really depends. One way that we measure it sometimes is the number of projects in your solution. But on the other hand, there could be a smaller solution with fewer projects, but those projects have a ton of code in them or a ton of files. You can also kind of look at how long it takes Visual Studio to load, and sort of how your performance is and how much memory is being consumed. And I think all of that dictates large solution. When I think about it, I'll sometimes use a baseline of 100 projects, but I think that's pretty general, and it really varies a lot.
Yeah, that brings up a good point, because it's not just the number of projects, which I always thought a huge solution is something that has a lot of projects. But it's what's the nature of those projects? How many files are in there? Is it like C# or C++, or what type of compilation and loading of IntelliSense and whatnot happens in those projects as well, right? So what you were mentioning, it can take a long time for various different reasons to open a solution, and that can define that whether or not this is a large solution or not. Does that mean that you can have a solution that has 10 projects then that can be considered a large solution?
Yeah, it could be 10 projects and have tens of thousands of lines of code. And so I think it definitely varies. And also, depending on the project size and project structure, like you mentioned, people may see performance issues or different things. And it isn't all dependent on size, but a lot of it has to do with it.
Yeah, okay. Well, that kind of makes sense. And I know that it's something that we use internally. We have all these different solutions that we use to test whether or not the features we do to improve performance on large solutions, they're huge, those solutions that we use internally to test with. And so how do we then replicate those same problems? Is it a lot of different projects, and how many are we talking about, and how many files, and how do we set ourselves up to test with huge solutions?
I think I'll answer this one, Andrew. I think so. One thing that's really awesome about working at Microsoft is that we have a lot of repos to access, and a lot of people that are using sort of the preview channel, and that we can reach out to and say, can you test this on your solution? For example, there's people that use the Git Chromium repo, and that has the people that use that, at least that we've worked with, have about 10,000 projects in their solution, which is massive. And so anything we're going to test, that's a great place to start. And then there's a ton of different ranges of project sizes and solution sizes throughout the company. So that's one way we test it. There probably are other ways as well that I'm not really sure of, but Yeah, that would be my answer.
Okay, wow. I didn't expect you to say 10,000 projects. So this is not just a test solution, right? This is an actual repo that a team with team's real code. Is it the Chromium repo on GitHub? What is it?
Yeah, I believe it's the Chromium repo that's used with that in our Edge team as well. Is the team that we work with.
All right. So of course, when you're dealing with something like massive on that scale, performance can take a hit. But Andrew, it's not just the performance, right? It's also your way to navigate like around a solution like that. Like, how do you even like start to reason about what project to work in when you have 10,000 or 500, right? You could also be 500. I think is still like a pretty huge solution, right? 500 projects. But how do you like say how do we handle stuff like go to definition from one C# type that takes you in and it has to now figure out which one of those 500 or let alone 10,000 projects to go to? Like that seems like a huge potential problem as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. You kind of hit on several problems that we see today around search and navigation. The first is speed. The bigger the solution that people work with, the more of a performance impact there is. And even within searching for code and navigating through code, being able to get that really quickly and have that at the same speed as somebody who's working with like 2 or 3 projects and starting from scratch is a real problem. I think he also mentioned like accuracy, something that we've talked about in terms of how do you navigate to something in a really, really large solution or across repositories. And these are all kind of like relatively new problems that, as code bases have gotten more and more complex over the last 10, 15 years. So these are definitely areas that I'm looking into.
Yeah. And so I know that some people do this where and we actually have a question here. It's kind of a good time to bring that in. Jerome asks, is it then common for teams to split their projects over multiple solutions? So you might have a repo that has multiple solutions like SLN files, right? And so I remember having done this myself back in an earlier life where the front end team and the back end team would each have their solution. And then there would be one sort of solution that would be the big solution that had everything. And that would be the one that we used to build for CI server, would build that one. But there would be smaller solutions for each kind of type of development going on. Is that normal? Is that what people do, Andrew?
So I think it kind of depends. Like what we've seen through our user interviews is that like people kind of have a lot of different ways to deal with it. One way is definitely to split things up into different solutions and then open the ones in the areas as they work through them. I think one factor I've noticed that it depends on is how complex and how integrated the code is. What I've seen through some user interviews in the past is that when a code base is just kind of grown organically, there's a lot of ties between the various projects, various files. And so in that case, it's actually a little bit harder to open up multiple solutions because everything is just so tightly integrated. Versus when you have code bases that are a bit more distributed, it's easier to have multiple solutions that set up with subsets of projects.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for instance, if you from one project have a reference to another project, that is fine. But if that other project now have a reference back to you and you have circular references and all that sort of stuff,
right,
then it's really hard to split things apart into multiple smaller solution sets. Is that kind of how I understand what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
So a good architecture that separates things like in different tiers, for instance, it would be something that would be beneficial if you want to split things out in different solutions.
Yeah. I want to add one thing to that. So yeah, I think not super uncommon to have multiple solutions. We have been working on an option, and this is a good tie into something that I've been working on that's called solution filters. And it allows you to do the same thing as what you're describing, Mads, where you have multiple solutions and then one bigger solution as well, where you might divide up the code. However, it's all within the same solution. So it's essentially like you would open the subset of code that has to do with the front end development, or you'd have a solution filter that has to do with the back end code, and however you choose to break it up. But then it's all in the same solution. And so you don't it's a little bit less worried about, or you don't have to be as concerned about all the dependencies and stuff because it's all in the same solution. It just breaks up what you're working in that moment.
Okay. So yeah, because that would potentially solve a big problem, right? I could foresee if you have multiple solutions, and I remember when we did that in my previous life here, the problem was that they got out of sync. So you create a new project that you want to add to your solution, but you forget to add it to the other solutions, and now things are out of sync. What you build in one team is not built on the CI server, or vice versa, and it becomes kind of messy. But here you're saying like something called solution filters, and there is just one solution. But so how does that work? If there's only one solution, how can you split things out?
So the way it works is basically you have one big solution, and then you can create these solution filters. So it filters down, so you get to choose the projects you want to work with. So like, for example, it might be I want all the front end code, or I might work in a project or in a solution with 100 projects, and I only really focus on 5 projects at a time. And so I can just load those projects. And then even if there's other dependencies or things like that, I can either include those or load those as needed instead of working with those all the time. But the solution filter itself is built on top of the solution file, and it's pretty easy to use. It's really just you name the files you want to work with, and then the solution filter remembers those. But because it's all part of the larger solution, it stays in sync with the other things that are being edited and changed, so you don't really get behind as you might with multiple solutions.
Okay. So that sounds pretty awesome. This might be an interesting. No, I have one question before we take a question here from the audience. So, is that then just a view like in Solution Explorer? Because I know that we have this ability to scope Solution Explorer just to show the content of one folder or solution folder or a project or something like that. Is that what this is, or is it like it's just a view, or does it do something deeper than that?
It's deeper than a view. So one of the biggest benefits of using solution filters is that, say you have a project or a solution with 100 projects, loading all of that does have performance impacts, or even especially with larger ones or even smaller ones, loading more projects will affect the performance and the amount of memory consumed. And so in using solution filters, you only open the projects you need. So that might be 3 projects, that might be 10 projects, it might be 100 projects. However, then you're consuming way less memory than you would be by opening the entire solution. So I'd say that is one of the biggest benefits. It also is a much faster solution load time. And let's see what else. It just creates a more manageable workspace. So you don't have to deal with, when you search for something that you know is in the 3 files you want to work with or the 3 projects you want to work with, you don't have to deal with the hundreds of results from the entire code base.
Yeah. Okay. So that's actually really smart. So because it takes time for Visual Studio and memory, CPU and memory to load every project that it needs to load in the solution. So the fewer projects that it needs to load, the less work has to be done, and the faster everything becomes. Solution load, but also stuff like IntelliSense maybe and other things as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a bunch of your solutions or a bunch of your projects not loaded, then how do you then navigate in code from like what is loaded into what is not loaded? Like how does go to definition work, let's say, or find all references if things are no longer loaded, Andrew?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think find all references is probably a prime example of that. And the short answer is in today's world, it doesn't. So when you only open a subset of projects, you're limited to what you've got loaded in your editor. And so you're unable to find references in the projects that are unloaded. However, that is what we're actively working on. That's something that we've learned, is that even, as a developer, if I'm working on, let's say, 5 out of 1,000 projects pretty regularly, I might still want to check references to make sure any code that I'm editing doesn't impact the other 995 projects that are unloaded. And so I'm actually PMing a service, a cloud-based service that will be able to provide that information from within Visual Studio. So you get the whole complete experience of searching against your entire solution, even though you only have a subset of it loaded.
Oh, so that sounds really cool. So that means that if I only have a few projects open, like everything is super fast and smooth and everything works great in Visual Studio, it still handles the searching and the navigation as if I had the entire thing loaded. Do you understand that right?
Yep, absolutely.
That sounds pretty fantastic. And is the benefit here just for those large solutions like 100 or 200 or 1,000 project solutions? Or is there benefit here to like even smaller ones, like 10, 20, 30 project solutions?
Yeah, there can definitely be benefit with smaller solutions as well. Let's say your code is open source, and so you have 10, 20 projects, relatively small code base, but you have other folks who are leveraging your projects. In this case, you can then find references and see how others are using your code.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess, Kira, the one of the things when I remember seeing solution filters for the first time, I don't really have any solutions with a lot of projects in them. But I was like, oh, that's just a nice way to kind of separate the concerns here so that I don't see, I reduce the noise in Solution Explorer, if you will, without kind of compromising my developer experience. Is that something we're thinking about too?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part. Yeah, and two things I would mention is first, when you're creating your filters, so first you can hide or show the unloaded projects. So if you want just a really clean workspace, you can hide the unloaded projects and then you don't even have to worry about those, and less scrolling in the Solution Explorer, less things to search through. It's pretty simple. And then the other thing, this was something I was just going to mention, is that when you create your filter, you can also load the projects and we can automatically detect the dependency trees when you load it. And so in having the dependency trees, then when you're doing things like searching and incremental builds and stuff like that, it's really helpful because you don't have to go track that down. Visual Studio is doing that for you.
Awesome. I think it might be time that we see this thing in action.
Yeah.
Should we go check it out?
Yes. All right. Can you see my screen?
You're on. Yep.
Okay, cool. So to use solution filters, what you're going to do is you're going to go to Open, Project or Solution. I'm going to use Orchard Core. And then there's this tiny checkbox right here that says Do Not Load Projects. If you check that, and there's also an option if you open your code from the command.
Sorry, can you just zoom in so we can see that better?
Yes.
So this is just the open project dialog.
Yes.
Like file, open project. Yeah.
So when you click your solution file, there's this checkbox right here that says do not load projects. There's also an option to do this from the command line, and the command is / do not load projects when you're opening your code. But so then if you click open, so then when you get into Visual Studio, you can see that 0 of 160 projects are loaded. Had I opened this in the regular manner, this probably would have taken a number of seconds to actually get it working. So it opens really fast when you open like this. Then you can choose the projects you want, and you can right-click on them. And there's the option to either reload the projects or reload the projects with dependencies. So I've highlighted 4 projects right here, but when I reload with the dependencies, let's see. Oops, I don't think I reloaded with the dependencies. But basically you have that option to do so.
So what does that mean with dependencies? That means if one project has a reference to another project, then it goes down that follows that tree of dependencies and load those other projects as well?
Yeah, so it gets the entire dependency tree. So yeah, all the projects that project's dependent on and that they're dependent on, those are all included, which can be really helpful if you're hoping to, say, build a project or if that's the workspace that you want to work in. So then I can, say, open one of these, and you have the code that you can work in, and I can also hide the unloaded projects, which is something I mentioned before. And see, now it's a lot easier to manage. Instead of having 160 projects showing up in the Solution Explorer, I have just a few. And then so once you've opened Visual Studio and loaded 5 projects, the 5 projects that you want, Visual Studio will remember this, and the next time you load the solution, it will load those 5 projects. Now, in the case that you wanted to actually save this subset of projects, you can do that as well. And you would right-click on the solution node and then scroll down to Save as Solution Filter. And I'm going to save this as 5 of 160 test, which I already have. And it saves as a .slnf file. And this is just a really simple file. I think I mentioned this before, but it's a list of paths that are easy to edit. So now I am working in a solution filter file. And I can now, that's going to be saved. And when I want to open a new file, I can just open the filter instead of the original solution and work in there.
Very cool. So that means that you can, so that file is a file that lives next to your solution file. And it's called SLN. F is for filter, I guess. I'm guessing. That means you can check that in. That means your entire team can work on the same solution filter.
Right. And there's, a bunch of different use cases. You can share it across the team. We've seen people that will create solution filters that basically have their code and exclude their unit tests, or a bunch of different variations with testing. You can also just create them on an individual basis. Or you can create filter files for new people joining the team. Like, let's say, they're only going to need these few files at first. It can kind of make the transition to a new code base a bit easier. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can use solution filter files.
But that was pretty cool. Can you show that again where you closed the solution and then you opened it? Because that was fast.
Yeah. So it's closed right now, and it also shows up in your sort of recent options as well. So this is that SLNF file. And within a few seconds, it's already loaded.
It was like 1 second.
Yeah, very quick. And if you were to load the entire solution, it would have taken much longer, I promise.
And this is Orchard Core, I can tell, which is like one of the big open source projects using .NET Core. And that was so fast. So, but then, okay, so now that we have this open, so Andrew, you were mentioning that we could actually kind of navigate to files in projects that weren't loaded.
Yeah, so one of the issues that we came across when we first started rolling out solution filters and sharing it with users is that, this is great. If for whatever reason, let's say I had loaded without dependencies just because I clicked on the wrong thing, I would just be restricted to searching against these 5 projects, right? And so, for example, if I was just to find the references, like locally, Kira, if I could help you help maybe just click on find all references, then you see one result, right? Because that's the only thing that's loaded. And what we learned from our users was that, well, if they really need to understand where things are being used properly, they can't right now. And so they end up jumping out into the Azure DevOps, into GitHub, into their code hosting platform to then perform a search. And if they really just wanted to find a reference, they've now had to open up, a browser, maybe multiple tabs, and perform searches over and over again to get to where they wanted to, where they wanted to in Visual Studio, being just one click away. So something that we're experimenting with is, how can we provide kind of that same fidelity results without having you jump out into the web browser and do all these searches? Kara, I'll have you kind of try again. If you see this list, there's a new command that we're playing with called find external references. If we click on that, we'll see there's definitely way more than one result, right? And what this is doing is we've got a cloud service that's indexing all of our code every single time a new commit is pushed. And we index the relationships between all of these symbols so that they're on hand. And when you click that find external references command, it essentially just makes a call out to our service and we return everything.
Wow. So these are simple. These are semantic lookups. It's not just finding the piece of the text. It's not like a string search. It's a simple search across that service that you're mentioning.
Correct. And if you've made any local changes and you haven't checked them in, obviously we wouldn't be able to pick that up. I'll get into that in a second. But this is basically correct to the latest commit, as I mentioned, and it is a symbol search. So essentially, you can have a higher level of confidence in it, right? Versus just having a text-based search.
Does that mean that the servers have to then compile whatever is in that commit to be able to figure out like the references between the different symbols and so on?
Yeah, it does. It essentially indexes all of the relationships between the symbols. The nice thing is that once we've kind of indexed it the first time, we are able to just incrementally look at what's been changed, and then instead of having to index the entire thing time over time, and so performance is actually fairly great.
Oh, so you can kind of do a delta on the commit.
Exactly.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, but then I would assume, since you have to know about the languages, if it's C#, you have to spin up Roslyn to figure these things out. And if it's C++, you have to engage the compilers there. So how many languages are supported?
So right now we support our core language, C#, C++. We also support Java, TypeScript, and JavaScript. And we can include new languages as we kind of keep expanding our service, but those were the core set that we started with.
Right. So here's another question. Is this service something that will be part of the Azure DevOps server offerings?
So right now we're still experimenting on this internally. You can kind of tell we're working out some of the kinks in the workflows. So I definitely just keep an eye out on it. We, once we've kind of tested this out internally, we'll start figuring out how best to integrate it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, so I got a question here that speaks a little bit to both of these two problems, one being the big solution loading memory CPU cycle problem, and the other being the code navigation problem. So Jeff asks, would using an internal NuGet repository for internal development be beneficial? So what are the trade-offs? So let me just expand on this just a little bit. So I know a lot of people, or some teams do this, where they basically break up their solution into smaller ones and produce a NuGet package, or just a DLL or a set of DLLs, and then they include references to those DLLs from their bigger solution. So instead of doing a project to project reference, you do a project to NuGet package reference. That way, you don't have to load, Roslyn and compilers or whatever for the entire dependency tree. You just have to do it to the NuGet package, and then the NuGet package is not indexed anymore, right? And so that will boost performance, I take it. But there seems like there should be some trade-offs from doing that as well. I don't know, Kira, from like a project load perspective, what don't we get if we do that?
I am going to be honest, this isn't my area. I'm not super familiar with NuGet packages and how that would affect it. Yeah, I'll let Andrew tackle it.
All right.
Yeah, I could probably speak to it a bit more from the search side, in terms of some of the benefits that I could see. I mean, I think having it as NuGet packages has your code a bit more segregated, so it is easy to not have the same problems that we've talked about in terms of having very complex intricacies between our code. I think that I also don't work in the NuGet team, so this would be something I want to double check with them. But I think something I can see is that from a navigation perspective, you would probably still be restricted to navigating from what you've got loaded. So you wouldn't be able to get too far outside of that scope.
Yeah. So that makes sense that it stops at that scope. But what if the NuGet package has been compiled with there's something called source link, which basically knows the symbols and the source code files where they exist, like on GitHub, for instance, or Bitbucket, or wherever you keep your source code, such that you can debug you all the way through into the source files themselves. Is that something that RichNav might be looking into? So instead of just indexing what's there, it can follow those source links from NuGet packages as well.
Yeah, you actually completely read my mind. So that is one of the benefits, is that as our service is able to index, let's say we're indexing the entire organization's code, then now you can start jumping through things that are not just one step away, but 2 or 3 steps away, right? So I can jump, let's say, from a symbol in my loaded code base to, let's say I want to look at references. I pull a reference from a file that I don't have loaded in my scope. I can continue navigating through that. So if I wanted to see a definition from a symbol in that file, I can, jump into that, or I can continue to see, hey, what are references of this other symbol in the file as I've continued kind of learning and researching my code.
Right. So it seems like that's a solvable problem. The whole code navigation across all this thing is something we're looking into, and an answer is in the works, right? A smooth experience, kind of what Kira was demonstrating just a moment ago.
Right.
That's pretty fantastic. That's that's almost magical. That's like space age type of stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely the super exciting part, right? And so like part of the reason we're experimenting internally right now is because you know, we want to make it smooth, but we also want to make it like an experience that won't be overwhelming. So that's where we're still playing around a little bit with like how do we present things in Visual Studio in a way so that you can kind of understand what's in your loaded scope, what is not, and you can make the jump and still have a good experience overall.
Yeah. Okay. So if we just continue that with that question of like referencing NuGet packages or DLLs instead of having project references, like with solution filters, Kira, it seems like, and of course with rich nav kind of working either way, the navigation that Andrew was talking about, it seems like there should be no real benefit to doing that anymore. It seems like we should just do regular project references because we can kind of use solution filters to overcome the issues and we can keep all the benefits. Is that right?
Yeah, if I'm understanding correctly, I think so. And I would say also, yeah, the more sort of dependencies and references you have, so part of the benefit of solution filters is that you're working with less projects. So when people have really intertwined dependency trees and like monolithic repos, it does take away some of the benefits. And so it would be simpler to sort of keep those separate and have like project references or a less sort of complex dependency structure as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so that brings us into another question here by SwiftCut. Like, talk about structuring project dependencies. Like, if you have these very deep dependency structures, then that's not a very good way to dealing. Like we talked about this a little bit to split things out into solution filters, right? Because you load one project and then you have such a deep dependency tree that it loads every other project in the solution. And so abstracting things out and do like I'm not going to say microservices, but that could be one type of architectural pattern that could take care of that sort of stuff, right? So I guess it all comes down to that at the end of the day. The more you separate things out, the more you can then filter away as well. That seems to make sense to me.
Yeah, and I think like from what I've seen, that is kind of the intent. As code bases grow, at some point, it's not intentional that you have this convoluted giant monolithic code base, right? A lot of times it just organically grows, kind of like probably a mess in my closet, and then all of a sudden you're just like, oh my God, what happened? This thing is huge. And so, I think, yes, like to get back to your point, like having abstraction is definitely great. I think that as code bases grow, you kind of have this growing pain you go through before you're able to kind of overcome it or take the time to finally dedicate to it and restructure it in a way that makes sense. Yeah.
So I remember hearing about solution filters, and it seems like it's a long time ago. This is not a new feature, is it? When did we actually ship the first version of solution filters?
Yeah, I think if I'm correct, so I'll preface with I joined Microsoft about 6 months ago, so I've been working on this for the last 6 months. I believe it's been around for about 2 years, but there's been a lot of different iterations and sort of improvements we've been making throughout that journey. And there's also a lot of improvements that we're currently working on. But it's been around a bit. There's been some changes and a lot of bug fixes as well. And for example, what I showed you in the demo, the option to reload projects with dependencies, that's a brand new addition. And that was something that we found after talking to a lot of customers, that why have to reload the project and then load the dependencies when you could do that in one step? So we're continuing to sort of figure out what these little shortcuts and things we can do to improve the experience are and adding those in.
Right, so it's getting easier to use and more powerful as each update to Visual Studio comes out, kind of. But my understanding is that a lot of people don't know about solution filters, and I guess it is kind of a hard thing to know about. It's like one of those things that, like, if you don't know about it, there's no way of knowing. Kind of, you have to explore, find out on your own. Exactly. This is a problem all over big apps like Visual Studio, where you have so many features, right? And it's like hard to find and figure things out. So are you doing anything to make it easier for people to discover and find out that this is actually something that could help them tremendously?
Yeah, we're really focused on that. So discoverability is one of our hugest problems. And we think that this tool and this feature could be really, really helpful to a lot of people that work in large solutions or just people in smaller solutions that see performance issues. And so we've been doing a number of experiments and sort of trying to figure out the best way to target people and teach them about the feature in a way that isn't disruptive to their workflows. And so we are working on that right now, and we're sort of finalizing some designs and stuff that we're hoping will make it a little bit easier to find and then use. Part of solution filters is there's a number of different factors, but a big part of it is wrapping your head around working in a partial solution as opposed to a full solution. And so to do that, we want to make it really clear and make the process as easy as possible. Right now, the process involves a lot of right clicks through the context menu, which for a lot of developers is totally fine and easy to use, but we want to make sure that it's a good experience for everyone that uses it and that they can make their solution filters and have them accessible as quickly as possible.
Yep, that makes sense. So yeah, so right click might be fine if you know that it's there, right? Otherwise, so solve the discoverability problem, and then maybe it's still going to be somehow in the right click menu. So if you watch this video in like 2023, then it might still be in the context menu, right? When you right click the solution, for all we know at this point.
Okay. Yeah, there might be other access points as well, though. Yep.
Yeah, right. Okay, so here's a comment from Marek. He's asking if there are any other options that we will consider today to boost the performance for Visual Studio solutions. What do you say, Kira? If we don't think about solution filters, but just in general, like what else can we do? I think we talked about the NuGet package or the DLL, so like drop project references, but that has some negative side effects as we talked about. What else can people do?
Yeah. So one thing I'm thinking of is that we're working on a number of sort of different tools and features that load things or do things in external processes as opposed to overloading the processes within Visual Studio. So that's something that we're working on. There are a couple of feature flags and stuff that I think that you could probably play around with of tools and features that we're experimenting with and rolling out. That would be my first thought.
Yeah, I was thinking about also like what does it mean to boost the performance for a Visual Studio solution? One thing is that you can load it. Another thing is like how long does it take to run a build of the entire solution? Which I don't know if you have any insights into how we can accelerate builds. There are some products out there, some extensions that help with build acceleration, but I don't know how much that has been part of your work, Andrew or Kira.
It hasn't been directly in my work. We actually both do have a colleague who is looking into the performance in general. So a lot of the things that you've hit on, what does performance mean? How quickly are users able to go from loading into doing coding or building or anything like that? How long does it take to build? These are all areas that we've actually got dedicated program managers looking into.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
There is one thing that I can share actually, because I was talking to one of the engineers like a while ago on what takes time when you start up Visual Studio. What is it that where does the CPU spend time that it doesn't have to? And there's a couple of things. So I think one was interesting, which was just loading tool windows. So let's say that you have a bunch of tool windows open, but they actually take a moment to load, and so there's an extension out there called Reset Tool Windows, which undocks them except for the ones that you really want, the ones that are performant when you just open Visual Studio. Like Solution Explorer is actually pretty fast, but there are other windows that might not be. Like I think the arrow list is not as fast as Solution Explorer, for instance. So instead of having it also always visible, it will just minimize it into its wherever it is docked. It will just be minimized there. And so go check out Reset Tool Window. I'll see if I can put a link at the description here later on. And another one is if you open a solution in Tools options, there's a couple of checkboxes that are interesting. One is to not load or not open any of the documents that you had opened the last time the solution was open. Because when you open a document, let's say it's a C# file, well, that now kicks in the syntax highlighting, which needs to spin up Roslyn to do that. So all of a sudden you start, as part of your solution load, you're starting up a bunch of the Roslyn workspaces or other sort of engines under the hood, and that adds to the time it takes for Visual Studio to be like fully responsive, if you will. So that's one. The other one is restoring the entire state of Solution Explorer. So when you've been working all day, you have a bunch of folders open, you have a bunch of projects, and the Solution Explorer is super long. And next time you open Visual Studio, it will make sure you get to that same view, that same state of whatever was collapsed or visible. So there's another checkbox up in Tools Options for disabling that. So you always get to sort of the short view where you just see everything collapsed when you open that solution. Those are two things those three things are some that I do. And I think that works across the board. It has nothing to do with the size of your solution or anything like that, but it actually speeds up starting Visual Studio significantly. So try that out.
Yeah, there's one more thing I could mention, and some people are familiar with it, some people aren't, but there's a view in the Solution Explorer called Folder View, and it's a little bit different from the normal solution view, but it essentially loads all of your folders and subfolders really quickly, and you can work in those and edit those. There's a couple of limitations in terms of, I believe, build and one other thing as well, but some people work in that and it's a lot quicker. It's also quicker to load, and when you're opening Visual Studio, there's the option to either open a project or solution, or there's the option to open a folder, and if you open a folder, it will automatically open it in Folder View. And so it's definitely a little bit different, but there are some performance benefits there, and we worked quite a bit. That's a little bit similar to working in Visual Studio Code. That would be like Visual Studio's version of Visual Studio Code. But that also has performance benefits as well.
Yeah, because it doesn't have to load the project solution hierarchy or anything like that. There's no such thing as a project reference, except for on the build side of things. Once you kick off a build, MS Build will do its thing and follow the project references, but Visual Studio itself will not. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because we already separate sort of a lot of the loading of the underlying project system and IntelliSense and syntax highlighting into background processes. That already happens today. It doesn't happen on the UI thread. It doesn't happen in the Chrome of Visual Studio itself, or the shell, as we call it. But it still has to marshal that information back and forth, like up to to actually do the colorization. That's a UI threaded thing, right? Color. And so even though things happen on a background, a lot of it happens on 64-bit processes and all this sort of stuff. So it can get pretty quickly return information to the shell, to the UI layer. Like there's still that processing. There's only one CPU, right? So if it's busy with that, then it's not prioritizing other things. So it doesn't really matter if it happens on the background thread necessarily or on the UI thread. It's still something that has to happen.
Yeah. There's one other thing I would add, sort of unrelated to that. Sorry, Matt. Someone commented about loading or enabling or disabling extensions, and that can oftentimes have a huge effect on performance. And you may have seen before, or people may have seen that we'll give a notification saying like, oh, this extension is using a lot of your memory. We recommend you disable it. And that can also help performance as well. So that was a good question.
Yeah, the good news about that, I think, is that Visual Studio monitors if any extension takes a long time to load up, and it will tell you specifically. So chances are, if you're using extensions today and Visual Studio does not tell you that this extension is slow, it probably isn't. It's probably not slowing you down. So that's the good news. So before you uninstall all the extensions that you've got, just the ones that Visual Studio tell you about, see if you can either disable them or write the author and say, hey, can you fix it such that it doesn't take that long. All right, I'm going through the questions. There's a lot of questions today. That was good. I like the one with the extensions there. This one. This is actually another interesting thing, right? Are you planning to add custom icons for projects? So it might not work on performance, but for visibility. And I'm thinking like for solution filters or something like that, it makes because we talked about solution filters as a way to reduce noise maybe a little bit. And I would argue maybe there's some accessibility enhanced that comes along with having fewer things you have to reason about. And if you have custom icons instead of it, just every project is the same green C# icon, would that be something that could be helpful here in these scenarios we talked about?
I guess in theory it could for visibility. It's not something we've thought of before, but it would be awesome if whoever suggested this or asked this, Mark, submitted a feedback ticket or a suggestion ticket, and then we can see if that's something that other people would find useful as well in the developer community.
Yeah, that's a good point. If anyone has a good idea here for where we could improve things, go up in Visual Studio to help, send feedback, and click request a feature. That's exactly where both Kira, Andrew, and everyone else on the team would look and find all these things. So please go ahead and do that.
Yeah, we do definitely get a lot of great ideas that come through that avenue. So would definitely vouch for, and we look at them. So
right.
Yes.
And someone says maybe not even icons, just colors, right? So yeah, same kind of idea. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Emoticons in the project names, is that not possible today? I tested it with just files, like a C++ file, I think it was, and it totally supports emoticons in the file name. Like any Unicode is fine.
I've never tried that. Now I want to.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to put frowny faces behind everything that I write code for and see if that works now.
You're gonna have like a heart.cs, right? You can totally do that. That works. It works on the compiler. It works everywhere. So, okay. So, solution filters. It's great for performance. It's great for reducing noise. What's the future of Solution Explorer? Where are we heading next?
So I would say, kind of like I mentioned before, we're working on a number of improvements, and we've been running a couple of experiments around the feature. Our goal is to make it as easy as possible for users to use solution filters, and we want to increase adoption because we think it could be a really powerful tool for people who are seeing issues in larger solutions. I can't say when these improvements will be coming, but I'll tell you that they are on their way. And we're also looking at what kinds of things people need in addition to sort of creating the filter and working in it, what kinds of tools people need, like whether it's full build, whether it's full search, sort of what things come after using solution filters and how we can make the process as easy and clean as possible.
Yep. And Andrew, what about that sort of fantastic navigational service that you were talking about? What's next there?
Yeah, I think overall what we want to do is to help developers, do whatever they want really quickly. And so part of the reason we're investing in search and navigation is to make sure that even when you're working with really large projects, really large solutions, or even fragmented solutions and code bases, that you're able to understand how everything relates to each other. So in terms of what's next, that's kind of our key area of focus. How do we get results really quickly to you? If you're working in Visual Studio, how do we help you not have to context switch a ton and have to open a bunch of different tabs and browsers and tools in order to get something that you just want to get done that's a click away. Now this is not an easy problem. I've learned that there's definitely layers, and I'm still learning as well. So we're definitely wanting to improve the experience, make sure it's smooth before we really roll this out to everyone. Yeah,
that makes sense. Well, that's really good to know that this is actually under active development, and there are plans for improving this. That's always wonderful. Okay, I got some questions here. Have we thought about this? Is probably for you, Kira, and it touches, I think, on a few things you mentioned earlier. Have you been thinking about dropping solutions altogether? For instance, OmniSharp in Visual Studio Code. So OmniSharp is an extension that handles C#. OmniSharp in VS Code can work without solutions. And then the .NET CLI or MS Build can then work without them, all within Visual Studio Code. Why don't we just drop solutions and do kind of the same thing?
Yeah, and Andrew might also have a thought on this. So from what I've heard, and I've heard a little bit about this and requests for this, my understanding is that Visual Studio is a pretty old tool. It was built 20 years ago, and when it started, it was built around the solution format, and that's sort of how we've continued to build the tool and expand the tool. And so while I see the use case for dropping solutions, there are a lot of people who are super reliant on the solution-based format. It's definitely something we've talked about and are actively thinking about it. But yeah, I think that there's pros and cons on both sides, and it would be a huge, huge transition for us if we were to drop the solution format.
Mm-hmm. And you were mentioning the folder option. So instead of loading a solution, you can load it as a folder. Isn't that kind of what this is? Like, because you can still build, right? There's still like a, what's that file called? Launch.json or something, or launch settings.json. There's like some file that defines that MS build should run and all this stuff. That works, I think.
Yeah. And I do think Open Folder or Folder View is an awesome tool as well that is, I would say, also underutilized or could be utilized more. But it does allow you to work without the solution and in a format that's really similar to VS Code.
Yeah. Do you still get like IntelliSense and go to definition and stuff like that when you open your solution? And I air quote solution, right? Because if it's open as a folder, it's no longer a solution. It's just files on disk at that point.
Yeah, I actually am not sure about that. I want to confirm. I want to say, so I know that there are some differences between working in Solution View and working in Folder View. IntelliSense may be one of them, which is a bigger one, but also there's pros and cons on both sides. I could confirm that and get back, but I don't want to say either is the answer without knowing for sure.
Yeah, right. It seems like one of those things that it might be different from solution to solution. So SwiftCut, try it out and let us know how it goes if it's something that works for you. Yeah. Okay, let's see here if there's any more questions. Man, they've just been coming in today. It's been pretty good. Yeah. Well, here's a little appreciation for the solution. Please don't drop them. All right. Okay. So let's see here. Oh, that's an interesting one. So is there any performance benefit in like not mixing solutions with, let's say, C++ and C# projects, like different types of projects? What if you separate them? Does that do anything other than separating them makes each part smaller, right? But beyond that, by not mixing different languages.
Let's see. So I'm honestly not 100% sure on this one. I know this is something that the developers that I work with would know. And I know that I don't want to speak on something that I'm not super knowledgeable, but I know that we have talked about this in the past and that there are some improvements for solutions that are in multiple formats that we're working on. Andrew might know as well.
Well, one thing I'm thinking of is like, if you open a C# file, then it loads all of the Roslyn workspace under the hood, and that takes CPU, it takes memory to do that, and keep that alive as long as Visual Studio is open, right? And you're working on those. And if you do the same with C++, C++ has its indexing engine that indexes all the IntelliSense and all those sorts of things, and that thing has to come online. And then you might have unit tests for each of them as well that uses different unit testing frameworks and so on. And there might be some test caching and whatnot. So I would assume that from a memory perspective, at least you will have a higher memory consumption if you have, let's say, C++ and C# working at the same time, especially in large solutions. But
yeah,
even
the good news is, sorry to interrupt, Matt. I was going to say the good news is we do have a lot of internal development teams that actually have repos containing both C++ and C# projects. So I've actually taken that down as a note to just kind of follow up and see how they work and understand them a bit more. But yeah, theoretically, I echo what you're saying. Like, it should be beneficial, but I want to double check.
Right. From that code navigation perspective, can I go from C# into C++ to go to definition? Does that work beyond the boundaries of the language?
So if you had like a C# file containing some sort.
Yeah, so let's say I create a native component that I'm now going to call through interop or whatever from C#. I guess it's not a full reference there, but is there any way that I can then move between the two layers?
I don't think we've actually looked into that before. So that's actually really, yeah, it's really interesting. Let me.
I don't know if it's a problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, if it is, my handle is on here. So if anyone who's listening in has a similar problem, I would love to hear from you. But yeah, I'll check into that too.
All right. So here's one. JJ is saying, hey, when you're using folder view, you only get highlighting. You don't get IntelliSense or usages, so you can't navigate to and from things. So thanks for mentioning that, JJ. People really like their solutions. Here's another one. Please don't drop solutions.
Yeah.
All right. I think we got just time for one more question here. Is there performance difference between the new sort of SDK style projects and the older legacy projects? So for instance, as an example of that would be the traditional .NET Framework 4.7 project versus a .NET Core or .NET 5 project. Like from a project system perspective, do they differ in perf or memory consumption?
I don't know the specifics of this. I do believe that there is a difference. I think .NET Framework is a bit older, and so I think a lot of the sort of improvements that we're making go towards both, but a lot of them have been focused on .NET Core and that sort of thing in recent times since I've been at Microsoft. But you guys also both might know more about that.
Do you have any idea there, Andrew?
No, pretty much the same as Kira.
Okay. What I've heard is that the SDK styles, they have a lot of benefits and they're much more feature rich, but they can also use a little bit more memory. But exactly how much, I don't know. And if it's something you're even going to notice. Okay, and that, our hour is up, or 59 minutes. So we are right on time. I think we went through pretty much all there's some questions we didn't get to. I'm sorry about that, but we get through a lot. So thank you everyone for posting these questions, and thanks to you two for joining me here today and help me learn more about solution filters and the richer navigation.
Yeah, thanks for having us. If there's anyone who works with large solutions, I personally would love to hear from you. So feel free to hit me up on Twitter. Would love to get on a call just to understand more about how you work. I think we saw in this hour that everyone works a little bit different. So folks love solutions, some don't. So would love to hear how everyone works with their code base.
Yeah, I agree. Same. And I saw there was a couple other questions about solution filters that I don't know that we had time to get to. But if anyone feels free to reach out to me and message me on Twitter or tweet me or just then we can set up a call. And like Andrew said, would love to hear about your issues with Visual Studio and how we can work on improving those.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing that. And you heard that out there. Just reach out directly to Andrew and Kira with deeper questions, or if you want to share your story. That's something we're kind of always interested in. I think one of the things that a lot of people don't think about is that just how different users of Visual Studio use the product. We all kind of think that everyone does it the same way we do, because how can that not be the smartest way of doing it, right? But that is definitely not the case. So everyone does it differently, and therefore we're always so interested in hearing your story so that we can improve Visual Studio for everybody. And with that, that's going to be the final words. So thank you so much, everybody, and see you next time.